Everyone loves the Mongols. They were great horse archers, they had a fat empire, and they made great beef. In 1266, Kublai Khan was sitting in his office looking at a map of the huge, sprawling Mongol empire and thought, like all men, it should be bigger. He was already close to completing his Eurasian countries on land deck, so he turned towards the sea. Unfortunately, horses can't run on water. The Mongols didn't fare too well at sea. Leading a Mongol army out to sea is like investing in Bitcoin. It seems like a great idea, up until you're suddenly underwater. The Mongols invaded Japan twice. The invasions actually had a huge effect on the Japanese. It forced them to change many things about how they governed. Let's talk about the lead-up to war. Why did Kublai Khan want to invade Japan? What was this Mongolian's beef with Japan? It's impossible to know what's in a person's head, but that's never stopped us before. Historians have thrown out some guesses, and I've caught them here for you in my baseball glove of knowledge. Maybe he wanted to impress the Chinese elite. Our man Kublai was the grandson of the great Genghis Khan, founder of the Mongol Empire and history's most incessant lover. Kublai was the Mongol leader at the time, and northern China was part of his territory. Japan, annoyingly, had not sent anyone to pay tribute to China for centuries, so forming some kind of relationship with Japan, or having Japan under his thumb, would have impressed the Chinese leadership. Kublai was Mongolian, but he was also a total Chinaboo. Sinabu? He couldn't get enough of Chinese culture. He'd stayed up all night watching Chinese fantasy TV shows. It was becoming a problem. He even, a few years later, pulled the ultimate Chinese culture nerd move. He founded a new Chinese dynasty, the Yuan dynasty. Or maybe his desire for invasion was just because he wanted riches. They had this idea that Japan was this magical country packed full of treasures and polite, obedient people. So yeah, the Mongols watched anime too. Or maybe his Mongol roots urged him to grab all land in sight. The Mongols had been on a conquering binge for decades. Everywhere they rode, people were just dropping dead and giving them land for some reason. Japan may have seemed like a natural next step. Kublai also had his eyes on Southeast Asian countries. In 1266, Kublai Khan decided to ask Japan nicely if they would pay him tribute. He picked two people to go have a talk with the Japanese, his Minister of Ceremonies and his Minister of War. The meaning behind his picks was pretty clear, if you're not a dummy. The Minister of Ceremonies handled affairs of vassal states, and the Minister of War handled affairs of piu-piu. Choosing these two sent a message: become a vassal state or become a vassal state. Kublai forced the king of Koryo to take responsibility for getting his two officials to Japan to deliver his message, which shows the kind of relationship they had. The Korean king really didn't want anything to do with this. War with Japan wasn't on his bucket list. What was on his bucket list? Fostering peace in the Korean peninsula and peeing on Kublai Khan's bed. The Korean king made a bunch of excuses. Oh, there's rough weather, we probably shouldn't travel, and what do you want with that insignificant country anyways? Kublai said, "Oi, I wasn't asking." "Oh," the Korean king said. And so the Koreans took the two envoys on their ship to sail across the sea, and then sail back when the envoys got scared the moment they ran into some rough weather. To show you how serious Kublai was about this whole Japan business, when he heard that they turned back, he immediately exploded like a teenager on prom night. He accused the Korean king of colluding with the Japanese behind his back, and the only way to atone for this crime was to get his message across the sea. The Korean king convinced Kublai to write a letter, and promised to have his people deliver it. So in 1268, the letter arrived in Kamakura, the seat of Japan's military shogunate. I kinda love this letter. It started out over the top. "I, Emperor of Great Mongolia, have received the mandate of heaven, and have become the master of the universe." So the typical Mongol greeting. Then he took credit for restoring peace to Koryo, then claimed, "In gratitude, both the ruler and the people of Koryo came to us to become our subjects. Their joy resembles that of children with their father." Nice, calling the Koreans his children. He later mentioned that the Japanese were similar to the Koreans. I'm gonna paraphrase this next part. "Plenty of small states have longed to form ties with us. Why haven't you? Maybe you just didn't know any better. Here, let me ask you directly to engage in friendly relations with us." And it ends with a pretty clear threat. Nobody would wish to resort to arms. Now, friendly relations could have meant a pleasant relationship, or it could have meant rule by the Mongols. Probably the latter, especially with that last sentence. The shogunate leaders didn't know what to do, but they knew that they weren't that fond of the Mongols. Japan traded with the southern Song dynasty. The Song imported a large amount of pain relief cream to rub on their bums that were in pain from all the ass-kicking they were getting from the Mongols. Being at war with the Mongols, the Song Chinese probably did not speak well of them to the Japanese. The Kamakura shogunate didn't know what to do, so they sent the letter to the imperial court in Kyoto. Here, you deal with it. The letter was addressed to the King of Japan anyways. That would be the emperor in Kyoto. At the time, Japan had two governments sharing the rule. I have a video about how that worked if you want to see. Sadly, Kublai Khan never saw that video because he didn't know about the two governments. People in the imperial court were livid that the letter called Japan a small state, and it called the Japanese emperor a mere king. I know, the audacity. A king ruled over one kingdom. An emperor ruled over many kingdoms and kings. At the advice of the shogunate, the court did not send a reply. They left Kublai on red. In the meantime, the shogunate told its samurai in the west to put on their panties and get ready for a possible invasion. The imperial court also contributed to the defense efforts. They began conducting prayers for protection. No one likes being put on red, least of all Kublai Khan. He called up the poor Korean king and put in an order for an invasion fleet. He wanted a bunch of ships and men for the voyage. The king wasn't even surprised. Any invasion of Japan was going to require Koreans making ships. Mongols were clueless about the sea. Meanwhile, Kublai kept sending envoys again and again. It got ridiculous. You kind of feel bad for the Koreans. They kept being forced to bring envoys across the sea, all because Kublai couldn't take a hint. I just want to talk. I really don't want to invade, Kublai kept saying while preparing to invade. Japan stayed quiet. There was this one trip where the Mongols landed with an envoy along with 70 soldiers. The Japanese mistook this for an invasion and chased them back to sea. The Mongols quickly sailed back home, but on the way they grabbed 2 Japanese fishermen from a fishing boat and delivered them to Kublai Khan's court. Kublai wined and dined them for a couple months and then sent them back, saying, Hey, tell your king to call me, okay? It's important. The Japanese responded by not responding and throwing the 2 innocent fishermen in jail. Meanwhile, in the Korean peninsula, the Mongol order to build ships for the invasion fleet was not popular among the anti-Mongol parts of the government's terrible approval ratings. A rebellion broke out and was trampled under Mongolian horses. The rebels were hurt bad and asked Japan for help, informing them of an imminent invasion. The Japanese debated on whether they should help. It was a long debate that finally concluded when the Mongols destroyed the remaining rebels. Things didn't look good for the Japanese. The shogunate ordered all of its samurai who had land in Kyushu to return to Kyushu immediately and prepare to defend against foreign invaders. Apparently, these samurai thought immediately meant years later. Now, I know that the samurai pay millions to marketing companies to sell you propaganda about their honor and loyalty, but don't fall for it. It's like thinking that Axe body spray attracts women, but all it attracts is other men who say, oh, I wear that too. A samurai didn't go around following his lord off cliffs and committing suicide every day. Getting them to move was like pulling teeth. People just did not want to go live in far-off Kyushu. Even after the first Mongol invasion, many of these procrastinating samurai had not moved. Even after the second invasion, years later, there were still people who did not move. The shogunate would send orders saying, what the fuck? We told you guys to move like 15 years ago. Anyways, Kublai took the hint and in a healthy response to rejection, decided to beat Japan into submission. By this time, Kublai Khan called his territory the Chinese Yuan dynasty, fully giving in to his China-boo nature, and Koryo became a vassal state of the Yuan. He also snatched a major success in his war with the Song dynasty. It was time to turn his bow towards Japan. It was a peaceful day on the island of Tsushima. Then everything changed when the Mongols attacked. After years of asking Japan to come visit and getting ignored, Kublai Khan decided that the only way to get the Japanese to acknowledge him as their emperor was by pew-pew persuasion. Kublai's piece of the Mongol Empire was called the Chinese Yuan dynasty because he really wanted to be Chinese. He gathered an invasion force of 15,000 Yuan soldiers and 8,000 Korean soldiers and tossed them at Japan, and Japan took it in the Tsushima. Now, the Japanese weren't caught totally by surprise. They had been ignoring for years Kublai's letters inviting them to come bow down to him. Snubbing a Mongol warlord usually hindered peaceful negotiations. Years before the invasion, the military shogunate in Japan told its warriors to prepare to defend the country, though the shogunate didn't seem too serious about it. Warriors in Kyushu had to serve guard duty on monthly rotations, but it was more like how you always had peacetime guards around the capital. It wasn't a fully stocked army ready and waiting to meet the enemy. To be fair, they didn't know when the attack would come. Hard to support a large army for years like that. They'd just eat up all your food, supplies, and women. In 1274, the Mongol fleet reached Tsushima, and its main force landed on Komoda Beach, where 80 Japanese samurai stood waiting and pissing their pants. The defenders were led not by Lord Shimura, but Lord So Sukekuni. The 80 defenders fought bravely against thousands. Ever seen the movie 300? The battle was like that movie if you skip to the end where the defenders all died. A week later, the Mongols sailed to Iki Island and repeated the process. They slaughtered most of the men, and there were reports of them doing something not very nice to the women. They drove holes through the hands of the women prisoners and strung ropes through them to keep the captives together, like they were making a necklace of bodies for a giant. They also used the women as human shields, and tied their dead, naked corpses onto ships and advanced on Kyushu. Now, I don't know if this scene from hell actually happened, but it was mentioned in two different sources, a Chinese and a Japanese one. The Mongol fleet then attacked Matsuura. After devouring the appetizers, they moved on to the main course, Hakata Bay. It was the only place in Kyushu where you could land a big army, and land they did, right on top of a Japanese army. This big shot warrior named Kikuchi Takefusa led the defenders. Takefusa was a cook because he served up the invaders' asses on a platter. The Mongols had to retreat. Now you would think that when an enemy runs away, it's the best time to give chase, but that's not what Takefusa did. This big shot warrior and his followers went the opposite way and just skedaddled. They left the battle on their saddles. It seems confusing, but what he did made total sense for him. You see, the shogunate had a real problem with its samurai. Japan didn't have a national army. When the Mongols attacked, the shogunate called for any warrior in the West who wanted to take up the hobby of Mongol head collection to rush over there. That was how armies were formed. Individual fighters rode to the battlefield in search of glory only decapitated foreign heads could give them. Some were alone, some brought a few meat shields with them. Over time, they would trickle in and be assigned to units. Even after the fighting already started, people were still trickling in. Another reason why procrastination kills. People fought not to protect Japan, gods no, but were they losers? No, they fought to earn rewards like land or horses. For that, they needed proof that they were heroic in battle. What counted as proof? A lot of things like witnesses, the enemy's armor, or body parts. Mostly heads, they really liked heads. So the main goal for many samurai was not necessarily to beat the invaders. It was to charge in, kill some guys, grab a few heads, and get their asses out of there to claim their rewards. Like fathers, these samurai left whenever they felt like it. Orders from commanders were more like strong suggestions. For example, this one samurai was ordered to stay and wait for reinforcements. And he was like, oh, sure. Then, equipped with his bow and a plethora of profanities, immediately charged into enemy lines and got shot off his horse. He was saved by a fellow samurai, but he still received rewards, not for falling off his horse, but for other stuff he did. But it shows that disobeying orders happened pretty often. Warriors were mainly concerned with ensuring that people saw their deeds in battle, so that they had witnesses who could testify that they were totally killing it in the battlefield. Just to smash under my boots the last remnants of this myth that samurai were mega loyal chads with an honor fetish, there were even samurai who arrived, signed their names, then just left because they didn't have to stay. Anyways, reinforcements arrived and chased the Mongols back to the coast. After some aggressive partying that got out of control, the Japanese pulled back. Seeing the Japanese retreating, the Mongols aggressively got back on their ships to sail for home, but not before burning some buildings first, including a famous shrine. Now, even with the problems in the Japanese army, they still pretty much tore up the battlefield. There's a popular narrative that the Mongols came in, bows blazing, kicking ass and taking heads, and that Japan was only saved by a typhoon. But popular does not mean right. Just look at Kanye. Let's poke some gaping holes through this popular narrative. So there's a myth that the samurai had this traditional way of fighting wars, where they only fought in honorable one-on-one duels and would stand there before each duel, declaring their names and titles and accomplishments like they were Daenerys ready to take over the Seven Kingdoms. A typical battle was full of warriors fighting one-on-one duels, and when the Mongols saw this, they just mowed down these samurai mid-introduction, killing them one by one with an organized army. Now, the only way this could have been true was if the islands of Japan were inhabited by morons. This myth came from old stories where people called out long introductions and challenged worthy foes from the other side, while reciting poetry and rescuing fair maidens with the whitest of faces. It was cool in the stories, it introduced the reader to important characters, it sounded romantic, and it would have been batshit crazy in the real world. Because even if it were a thing, the first time some chatty samurai stepped in front of the Mongol army and deep-throated a mouthful of arrows would have been the last time it happened. The Japanese weren't thick-headed. No, they fought in groups of mounted archers, and they did pretty well. The Mongols did not have an easy time, and even praised the Japanese for their skills with the horse and bow. The invading army wasn't all that great. It wasn't the army of badass, horse-blood-drinking, mounted archers that you normally picture when you think of the Mongols. This was more an army led by Mongols, but made up of Han Chinese and Korean foot soldiers. The famous Mongol horse archers were only a small part of it. I'm not taking a dump on Chinese and Korean soldiers, just saying it was likely hard to manage such a diverse army, especially when it was full of people who the Mongols had invaded. Morale couldn't have been high. These were soldiers fighting for their conquerors, soldiers dreaming of going home to their wives after visiting a prostitute. You don't usually think of grenades in early medieval battles, but the Mongols actually used bombs. Archaeologists dug up these bad boys from an old shipwreck. They didn't seem to make much of a difference though. So, how big were the two armies? Estimating army sizes in history is an art, meaning there's a lot of BS involved. You can't just accept eyewitness accounts. For example, if some samurai saw an army pass by and he writes down, "Hark, a 2,000-man army just passed." Can you really trust his estimate? Did he have drone footage of the army? Did he have a helicopter taking pictures? No, he probably just thought, whoa, that's a huge army. That's gotta be like 2,000 people. Well, anyways, time to turn in this head. If you thought medieval battlefields were savage, you should see historians argue over army sizes. The number of historian casualties in these debates are uncountable, and only increase when they debate over those casualty numbers. Reasonable estimates for the number of Japanese troops? Around 2,000 to 6,000. Some historians say the Mongols outnumbered the Japanese 4 to 1. Some say both were around the same size, and some were murdered. The Mongols' own account says they were outnumbered by the Japanese, and that the Japanese had 102,000 men, but no one takes that seriously. My guess is that the two armies were of similar size, since the Mongols did not just wipe the floor with the Japanese. And then we have the Typhoon. Did the gods send a divine wind to save Japan? Nah, probably not. There's no strong evidence. A typhoon did blow away the Mongols in the second invasion, but not this first one. It wasn't even typhoon season. The Mongols wrote down why they left. One of their commanders took an arrow to the face and had to be rushed back to his ship so they could put his face back together. They were also running out of supplies, and so they left, and the Japanese didn't need no divine wind to save them. The battle at Hakata Bay lasted 1 day, and the whole invasion lasted about a month. If at first you don't succeed, lose again. The first Mongol invasion of Japan in 1274 progressed about as far as I did with the first girl I ever asked out in high school. When the invaders returned, the Korean king begged the Mongol leader, Kublai Khan, to please shut up about any more invasions. His people were already starving because they had to provide soldiers and build ships for the last invasion. Kublai read this plea, then threw it in the trash with disgust, like it was a math test with a 9 out of 10 grade. He may not even have thought that the invasion was a failure. One general claimed that they totally demolished the Japanese and only withdrew because they ran out of supplies. The Japanese also didn't claim success and expected another invasion. Maybe Kublai thought he had slapped around the Japanese enough to clear their heads, because after the invasion, he sent a peaceful envoy to Japan to convince them to come visit and discuss becoming a vassal state over some wine. The Mongol ambassadors traveled to Kamakura, the seat of the shogunate government. The Japanese's bums were still sore from being invaded, and they were in no mood to play nice. They thought, what is a good way to let this Kublai guy know we're not interested? So they cut off the heads of the ambassadors. Head cutting usually sent a strong message, one in all caps with 4 exclamation points. Now, the shogunate was being a bit cheeky because there were 2 governments at the time, the military shogunate in Kamakura and the traditional imperial government in Kyoto. They were supposed to cooperate. The shogunate leaders just decided to kill the envoys themselves, then sent a message to Kyoto informing them of the decision. It was easier to beg forgiveness than to ask permission when you controlled the military. In 1275, after years of fighting, Kublai's Yuan dynasty conquered the Song dynasty. He rested for a few years, but Japan remained a thorn in his bum that he really wanted to take out. Meanwhile, Japan wasn't sitting around with the katana up its butt, waiting to be invaded. No, the shogunate ordered its warriors to build walls around Hakata Bay, the top invasion spot 4 out of 5 emperors recommended. They even planned an attack on Korea, but it didn't happen, probably for the best. Warriors in Kyoshu were put on wall duty, creating big, beautiful walls and having the fish pay for them. The more land you owned, the more wall you had to create and maintain. One samurai was documented as having to maintain about 1 foot of wall because he only had a tiny piece of land. They also stuck large, sharpened logs into the water to pierce any ships trying to land. The logs were about 9 feet long with a diameter of 4 inches. Warriors in Kyoshu had to perform guard duty, which lasted for months at a time. Even when not on guard duty, they had to be ready to ride into battle immediately at a moment's notice. They also built watchfires on the surrounding islands to warn of invaders or visiting wives. All this wall duty was a huge pain for the samurai, a financial burden. It would later be one of the reasons that the Kamakura shogunate fell. One day, Kublai Khan woke up and realized that the itch was back, and he needed to scratch it with some spears. An unattainable goal is infinitely attractive. He called up the poor Korean king and put in an order for an invasion fleet, bigger than the last. He told the king to really put his pee-pee into it this time, to really give it 110% suffering. It would be a massive invasion. He also called up the newly conquered southern China and told them to create a second fleet, twice the size of the Koreans'. Both forces would sail to Japan and proceed with a penetration of their defenses, doubly so. Meanwhile, Kublai didn't give up on the diplomatic route. In 1279, he sent yet another envoy to Japan. Seriously, Kublai, take a hint. Remember, he had sent about 1 million envoys even before the first invasion. This latest mission included recently conquered Song Chinese. Kublai thought maybe that would make a difference. The envoys traveled to the imperial court in Kyoto and urged the Japanese to at least come talk to the Mongols. They had already crushed Song China for God's sake. The court didn't know what to do, so they asked the shogunate. The shogunate leaders were like, how about we just cut off their heads? And the envoys were like, now hold on a minute there, and screamed before stopping abruptly. After his ambassadors from both missions failed to return, Kublai was really frustrated, almost as bad as when you were trying to make a sunny side up egg and the yolk breaks. He kicked off the second invasion. He was serious. He even created in his government a freaking ministry for conquering Japan. That was the name. The 2 fleets set sail for Japan. The Eastern Fleet had 40,000 men, the Southern Fleet 100,000. The Eastern Fleet, the one from the Korean peninsula, got there first. They just rolled over the islands of Tsushima and Iki like the islands were dough and they were making pizza. They were supposed to stay at Iki and wait for the Southern Fleet to sail up to meet them. But no plan survives contact with stupidity. They sailed straight for Hakata Bay without waiting. Maybe they thought that waiting for the Southern Fleet would have given the Japanese too much time to prepare. Joke's on them, the Japanese defenders were like introverts when the pandemic hit. They had been preparing for this moment their entire lives. A few ships landed on the coast of the bay. The invaders charged towards the Japanese, spears up, ready to beat the boy love out of them, and then faltered when the arrows started flying from behind the walls. They couldn't get through. They retreated to their ships and held Shiga and Noko Islands instead. The Mongol fleet was huge, but it didn't stop the Japanese from sneaking onto them at night and torching them. Defenders ran across a thin land bridge that connected Shiga Island to the mainland and raided the invaders there. The fleet retreated back to Iki to catch its breath and to wait for reinforcements. Japanese ships tried raiding Iki, but they didn't have much success. Finally, the Southern Armada arrived at Takashima, and with their powers combined, the 2 fleets got destroyed by a typhoon. Actually, the Southern Fleet got destroyed. We're not sure what happened to the Eastern Fleet. The Mongol leader decided to cut his losses and lead the remaining ships back home, abandoning thousands of soldiers on Takashima. Over the next few days, the survivors were slaughtered. The Japanese captured a few thousand enemies, but killed all of the Mongols, Koreans, and northern Chinese. Apparently, the Mongol forces treated civilians brutally, especially women, so the Japanese showed no mercy. They did spare the southern Chinese because southern China was recently conquered. The southern Chinese soldiers cheered until the Japanese made them slaves. The Mongol leader, who retreated, was charged by Kublai with the crime of leaving the battlefield and was convicted of being a little bitch. Now, unlike for the first invasion, there's no question among historians whether or not a typhoon hit in this second invasion. It was typhoon season, and documents on both sides confirmed the stormy destruction. The popular narrative is that the typhoon saved Japan, but was that true? Or could Japan have won even without a typhoon? The answer is complicated and involves asking how big were the invasion fleets really? If you go up to a person and ask them, hey, when the Mongols invaded Japan, how did the samurai defeat them? The person would probably say, oh cool, the Mongols invaded Japan? If you go up to a slightly smarter person, they would probably say, the typhoons saved Japan. Yeah, that is the popular story handed down to us by internet experts. Japan would have been doomed if it weren't for the typhoons that destroyed the Mongols. But let's find out if that's true or if it's just propaganda from the gods. The Mongols invaded Japan twice, and twice they returned bruised and bloody, leaving their balls in a foreign land. In the first invasion, there was actually no clear evidence of a typhoon. A Chinese history book says that a great storm did arrive, but it hit the Mongol fleet after they had already decided to leave. They were running low on supplies, and one of their commanders took an arrow to the face like a man. But later on, it contradicts, mentioning that the claim about a great storm was a lie. Japanese sources didn't make a big deal about any typhoons. One detailed Japanese text about the invasions doesn't even mention a storm, which is weird because why would you leave out such a big event if it actually happened? It's like writing a biography on John F. Kennedy and leaving out his assassination by aliens. The diary of one Japanese nobleman does mention that a reverse wind blew the invaders back home, but doesn't elaborate. It could mean that convenient winds gave the Mongols a good opportunity to sail back home. And it wasn't even typhoon season. The most you could say was that maybe there was some bad weather, but it didn't make a difference. The Mongols had already chosen to cut short their invasion vacation. They might have played up the idea of a typhoon as an excuse, so they didn't have to say they ran home like little boys. The second invasion was a little different. All the sources confirmed that a typhoon did smash into the Mongol fleet and just demolished them. It was a hand from God, and the Mongol fleet must have claimed belief in evolution. The Mongol fleet sank like the hearts of children when I bullied them. But the question is, did the typhoon save Japan? Without a typhoon, could Japan still have won? To answer that, we need to answer how big the armies were. The main Chinese source on this says that the invaders had two fleets. The Eastern Fleet had 40,000 men, and the Southern Fleet had 100,000. They sailed these huge armadas across the sea to Japan. If these numbers were true, the Mongols could have won just by coming in, dropping their pants, and smacking the Japanese with their tanuki testes. The Japanese only had a few thousand defenders. Problem is, you can't trust the Mongol numbers. Investigating army sizes is like asking a guy how many sexual partners he's had. You often get exaggerated numbers. The invasion of Normandy in World War II was the largest recorded sea operation in history, and that invasion had about the same number of men, 160,000. And they only had to cross the English Channel, while the Mongols had to sail a much larger distance. Most likely, the Mongol number was smaller. How much smaller? No one knows. One historian went as low as 10,000. Whatever the number, the Mongols seemed to have outnumbered the Japanese, but it wasn't enough to go totally all nine-tailed fox on them. The Mongols couldn't even get past the walls that the Japanese put up along the coast. The Japanese did really well. They kept the Eastern Fleet in the waters, not allowing them to land for almost 2 months. Although, to be fair, the larger Southern Fleet hadn't arrived yet. The invaders may have had more soldiers, but we gotta talk about the sorry state that the Mongol army was in. The Mongols are known for having one of the greatest militaries in the world among YouTube history video watchers. People have always dampened their pants fantasizing about how well the famous Mongol horse archers would do against the Japanese samurai. Those people should feel disappointed because that wasn't what happened. The badass Mongol cavalry was only a tiny part of it. Horses took up way too much space on ships. Their behinds didn't fit the seats. The invaders were mostly made up of people the Mongols conquered, like Koreans and Chinese. Coming from different backgrounds made it tough to cooperate. The Mongol leader Kublai Khan knew this and actually reminded the soldiers before the voyage that they had better cooperate with each other or they were doomed. They were former enemies of the Mongols who fought against them only a few years earlier. Morale was low and they might have had infighting within their ranks. Even the ships themselves were rushed during construction, especially those of the Southern Fleet. There's some evidence that the Southern Chinese were embezzling money that should have been going towards shipbuilding. A fool and his badly constructed ship are soon parted by typhoons. Also, a large force of samurai reinforcements were coming from the north, ready to join the defenders. So, if I put all of that info into my genius brain and ask the question, could Japan have won without a typhoon? The answer would be, maybe. I mean, it was certainly possible. The Mongols couldn't even land for 2 months, and they seemed like they had a rough time. It's also hard to resupply your troops across the sea. At the very least, it would have been a long, bloody war. So, where did this idea come from that a divine wind saved Japan? From the Japanese, actually. They prayed for the gods' protection constantly, and when the typhoon finally came in to wash away the enemy, everyone thanked the gods for the help. The government even rewarded shrines and temples for their prayers, for doing their part to defend the country. Sometimes an emergency is the best warning that you're not ready for one. Japan's military leaders thought they were hot stuff, genuine Carolina Reapers in human form. When the Mongols sent over ambassadors to intimidate them, the Japanese cut their heads off. It was like pulling down your pants and presenting your bum to the largest empire in the world, asking them to come take it. The Mongols did try to come and take Japanese bum in 1274 and 1281, but prematurely evacuated the battlefield without doing much. However, getting slapped in the face twice by invaders made the shogunate, the military government of Japan, take a long, hard look at its weaknesses and fix them. The shogunate's power grew, which you would think was a good thing, but it caused even more problems and pushed the shogunate closer to a cliff. At the time, Japan was ruled by two governments, the imperial court in Kyoto and the military shogunate in Kamakura. Being the boys with the bows and arrows, the shogunate took care of defending Japan from the mad Mongol marauders, but they quickly realized that the samurai didn't work as advertised. The loyal, brave defenders of Japan were more like opportunistic mercenaries. There's no evidence that warriors saw themselves as part of the same country. The idea of Japan as one nation, of one people, came much later. No one was fighting to protect Japan. They fought for rewards. Their loyalties were to their families, their houses, not to some fuzzy idea of a Japanese state. It was hard to control these guys. The shogunate needed generals to give orders to these men, so they decided to use an existing office called shugo, which is like a military governor. Each province had a shugo that took care of military and policing issues, so they were reasonable choices to lead the defense. But reasonable choices are not always reasonable. Many of these shugo were not famous warriors. So, these samurai from far away would ride to the battlefield, take one look at the inexperienced man they were supposed to serve, then say, "He can shugo kiss my ass." People usually didn't follow generals who still had mommy's milk dripping from their lips into their diapers. They looked around to join the unit of a more worthy general, someone who looked more impressive, more brave, or more wealthy. It was worse in battle. Generals gave orders, and warriors heard suggestions. A general was there to fight off the Mongol invasion, but a warrior was there to collect heads, like he was a disgruntled Ash Ketchum after his Pokemon career. Heads he could later turn in for rewards. People only respected and obeyed leaders who gave them stuff, like land or horses. What did some shugo they just met ever do for them? After grabbing a few heads, a soldier was likely to just peace out and leave the battle. Some people from other provinces even ignored orders and stayed home. They were like, not my province, not my problem. Remember, they didn't think of Japan as one unified state. After the first invasion, the shogunate leaders were shaken in their sandals, a Niagara Falls of pee just streaming down their leg armor, because they realized that if they wanted to survive another invasion, they had better make some changes. They needed more influence in Western Japan, and they needed these damn samurai to start treating the shugos with some respect. The shogunate had always ruled in the east, and tried its best to ignore central and western Japan, but it was time to move out of the starting zone and see the entire map. Kamakura gave some of its high-ranking samurai shugo positions in the western provinces and forced a bunch of warriors to move their butts to Kyushu, the most likely invasion location. The shugo office became more respectable because it was held by these high-ranking samurai. They were encouraged to secure the loyalty of men who fought in the invasions by giving them lands and other rewards. Then the shogunate made a big change. It gave land to shugo offices. Before, only individuals owned land. Land was the samurai currency. Monopoly players have monopoly money, girls have rich guy friends, and samurai had land. The shugo office leveled up in authority like a Magikarp becoming a Gyarados. Warriors who previously scoffed at shugos all of a sudden wanted to ride at that Gyarados tail. The new system made it easier for the shogunate to coordinate its warriors. Defending the country became the job of shugo offices instead of individual samurai. With the changes came new power and authority for the shogunate, but also new problems. So we know that the Mongols only invaded Japan twice, but the Japanese didn't. The Mongol leader, Kublai Khan, actually planned a third invasion. Japan was Moby Dick, and Kublai was a mad captain, obsessed with a prize too costly for his men to attain, yet too enticing for his ego to ignore. Even after the second failed invasion, the Mongols kept sending envoys to Japan, touting the virtues of being his servant. But Kublai died before he could invade a third time. Meanwhile, the Japanese kept preparing for another attack. They put men on wall duty for months at a time. The shogunate banned its western samurai from leaving the west, afraid that people would neglect their duties. The defense project went on for decades after the invasions. All the money for manning and building the walls came from the pockets of the people manning and building the walls, which were the warriors in the west, especially warriors from Kyushu. It was a huge hit to their bank accounts. Many of these men had already been forced to move to Kyushu, a place of cheap food and cheaper whores, a place out in the boonies. They felt exploited by a faraway government that seemed only to care about eastern warriors. The shogunate had even more problems. All the samurai that fought in the invasions came a-knockin' at Kamakura's doors, asking for land. Usually, after you won a war, you were supposed to distribute the conquered land as rewards to your soldiers. But it was a bit hard to distribute land you didn't have. They just fought the Mongols off. They didn't capture any lands. The shogunate leaders looked everywhere under the couch, but they couldn't find enough land to give. People waited years for their rewards. And much of the land the shogunate did give out was sad and tiny. Imagine waiting years for a large pizza, and all you got was a flaccid little slice, and it had Japanese farmers on it. Not only that, all of the new land giveaways were in Kyushu, freaking boony-ass Kyushu, to keep the local warriors there in case of another Mongol attack. People were pissed. Most land rewards went not to samurai, but to temples and shrines. These were called rewards for subjugating the foreigners. Warriors were mostly okay with this. They only complained in some cases when their own lands were being split off and given to the temples, but most people agreed that the gods saved Japan because of prayers. Internet article writers loved to burst their penile pipes over battle tactics and which side had the bigger, harder armor. But another battle raged all over Japan at the same time, the spiritual battle. When news reached the capital of a typhoon blowing the Mongols back into their mother's womb, a court recorder could not stop his tears, convinced that it was divine intervention. The gods had answered their constant prayers. This other half of the war raged in temples and shrines. Even in 1268, when a Mongol attack was just a possibility, The imperial court started doing prayers and curses against the invaders. Religious curses were seen as military action. The court prayed and prayed for days. In the second invasion, major temples busted out their most vicious Harry Potter spells and rituals, and did it 24/7. At one point in the capital, the ceremonies had more than 250 court members and the emperor praying furiously, desperately doing kegels to hold in their pee. They had people pray in shifts to make sure there were no gaps in prayers, like how soldiers made sure there were no gaps in the front lines. To these people, the gods were not just things you discuss on Sundays and then forget about when you're cheating on your wife. No, the gods were on the battlefield with them. A samurai in battle would pray for the gods to distract his enemies, guide his arrows, and, if the time came, delete his internet history. After the typhoon came and blew the Mongols into the Upside Down, everyone was convinced that it was because of all the prayers and rituals, even the soldiers who fought in the actual battle. Temples raised their hands to take credit for things that happened in the invasion. Some temples said they caused a god to shoot down an enemy general. Others claimed their prayers protected high-ranking samurai, and many said, "That typhoon? That was us." The shogunate rewarded temples and shrines more than they did the samurai. Again, samurai generally thought this was fair. The priests did call forth a typhoon, after all. Who were they to argue with results? Only when the land rewards conflicted with their own lands did they go, now hold on a minute there. Temples needed these land rewards to help them pay for the hard work of cursing foreigners. It was serious work. People with bad cursing and praying abilities were fired, and they brought in skilled cursers, real masters of the dark arts, men who could make that girl from the ring crawl right out of your ass. In 1309, the temples really displayed their usefulness when they stopped the third Mongol invasion of Japan. Now you may be saying, wait, I don't remember a third Mongol invasion. Yeah, that's because the temples claimed that their prayers were so good, they crushed the third invasion. Even before it arrived on Japanese shores, they were incredible. Temples gained even more power because, similar to Shugo offices, they started assigning lands to religious offices instead of individuals. This was to help temples continue cursing the enemy. Now, while the shogunate gained power, many shogunate samurai weren't happy with their tiny slices of pizza, and warriors in general started finding it hard to compete economically with a growing class of artisans and moneylenders. Also, samurai started becoming more independent from their families, either because they received new land rewards or because they started serving under shugo or local strongmen instead of their families. The heads of powerful families loyal to the shogunate actually hated this and blamed the shogunate for their men leaving. A soup of strife was brewing. And what happens when you have poor, independent, badass fighters who thought they deserved better? Bandits and local warlords popped up all over Japan like zits on a teenager right before her first date. All these issues, from outlaws to money problems, eventually helped push the shogunate off a cliff half a century after the invasions. Now, in my vast experience with life living, I've learned one important thing. Poverty doesn't pay the bills, but killing does. The samurai in today's video also learned this lesson. When studying history, we're like an eagle in the sky, looking down at big events and societal changes. But spend all your time looking at forests, and you will miss the trees. Spend all your time on Tinder, and you'll miss the best friend who's always been there, waiting for you. Sometimes it's good to see how individual people lived inside the forest of history. Today we follow the life of a badass samurai who fought in the Mongol invasions of Japan and his quest to get the rewards he deserved for defending his country. The only reason we know about this dude was because his ego was as big as his testosterone-packed balls. He commissioned an artist to make these illustrated scrolls of his deeds in battle, because the world had a hole that could only have been filled by the story of his life. If Instagram existed, he'd be on it every day, posting workout pics behind motivational misquotes. This samurai was a hero to Japan for helping to fight off foreign invaders, and a hero to Japanese historians for helping their careers, because much of what we know about the Mongol invasions came from these scrolls. Our hero's name was Takezaki Suenaga, and like most anime protagonists, he came from humble beginnings. Suenaga was a minor member of his clan. A land dispute took away what little land he owned, and his future seemed a bit absolutely doomed. Fortunately, one day Suenaga was blessed with a joyous event. The Mongols invaded in 1274. Nothing spells opportunity like foreigners coming to slaughter your people. Suenaga filled his luggage with the essentials: a set of armor, a bow, some arrows, and 4 men. Then he set off for glory. He arrived at the battlefield ready to kick ass and chew bubblegum, and bubblegum wasn't invented yet. Having 4 followers with you was pretty common. Most warriors who answered the call to arms had only a handful of followers, but there were a few samurai who brought more than 100 men with them. Our hero saw these rock star samurai strutting around, swinging their balls at passers-by, and his heart dropped. How was he going to stand out with his tiny balls among all these warriors? Suenaga reported to his assigned unit, where some young almond milk drinking commander told them that the terrain ahead was bad for fighting on horseback and ordered them to stay and wait for the enemy. Suenaga thought this was a smart and safe strategy for little girls. No, he had a better strategy, the Notice Me Commander strategy. Suenaga and his men disobeyed orders and rode towards the enemy, determined to be the first from their province to spill Mongol blood. It seems crazy that he could ignore orders like that, but this was pretty common. He was doing what all honorable samurai did in war: disregard everything in the singular pursuit of profit. Japan didn't have a national army. Samurai were like independent contractors who fought for rewards, which they got by doing badass things in battle, like collecting heads. It wasn't uncommon for people to toss aside orders to pursue the hobby of head collecting instead. One of Suenaga's servants urged him to wait for reinforcements, because a witness was required for claiming rewards. Instead, Suenaga yelled, "The way of the bow and arrow is to do what is worthy of reward. Charge!" It was a terrible idea. It was raining arrows and they didn't have umbrellas. Everyone got hit, including his poor bannerman, who was this dude who just ran around carrying Suenaga's banner. Interns get the worst jobs. As they lay on the ground, wondering why they brought a guy whose only job was to hold a big target above their heads, one of the Chad samurai, who led 100 men, came to their rescue. Afterwards, he agreed to be a witness to Suenaga's bravery, and Suenaga agreed to be his. Later, Suenaga saw this other samurai take an arrow to the neck bone, get up, then ask Suenaga to be his witness. He agreed. The battlefield was full of warriors going, "Hey, did you see the cool shit I did?" Again, their main concern was rewards, not something dumb like defending the country. After the battle, Suenaga's deeds were recorded. The path to getting rewarded for military service went like this. Suenaga's commander was supposed to send the shogunate a recommendation for rewards. The shogunate would investigate the claim, maybe summon some witnesses in case Suenaga was a dirty liar, then grant him land or something, along with a letter saying, "Thanks for saving our asses from those Asian bearded Legolases." Unfortunately, for some reason, his recommendation never reached the government. Suenaga got pissed off and decided to travel to the shogunate in Kamakura to plead his case. Remember, for all he knew, the Mongols could have been on the way for another invasion, and he should have stayed put in case he was needed. But that didn't matter. He wanted his payday. Now, Suenaga was here, and Kamakura was here. It was a 2-month trip, and he was a 2-bit samurai. He couldn't afford it. Money didn't grow on trees, okay? It grew on plants, rice plants. In hard times, you can always count on family, he thought. So he asked a clan elder for traveling money. The elder listened to Suenaga boast about how he bravely fell in battle after not laying a scratch on the enemy. It was convincing, but in the end, the elder refused. He said it was a bad idea, because the shogunate might soon ban warriors from traveling east, because they needed people in Kyoshu in case another invasion came. Likely excuse, old Japanese man. Like I always said, you can never count on family, Suenaga thought. And so he made a gamble. He gritted his teeth, squeezed his balls, and made the decision to sell his horses to raise money for the trip. This was a big deal. A samurai was nothing without a horse. A horse was like a computer to a PC gamer, or Reddit to an incel. Suenaga was going all in on the poker table of life. If the shogunate refused to hear his case, he vowed to become a Buddhist priest and never return. In 1275, Suenaga began his journey. The sad thing was that no clan member saw him off. His clan leader must have disapproved. He stopped by shrines on the way and prayed for the gods to grant him his sweet rewards. He arrived at Kamakura 2 months later and immediately visited temples and shrines to pray, and the gods said, okay, we get it. But nothing comes easy. Suenaga tried to meet with a government official, but he looked like some horseless nobody, so they ignored him. It took 2 months of being a Karen to everyone for him to finally score a meeting. Suenaga even knew someone high up in the shogunate, and it still took 2 months. Warriors with no connections must have had no chance at all. He met with the man in charge of rewards, Adachi Yasumori, who also happened to be his province's military governor. It could have been Suenaga's goal all along to talk directly with his military governor. Yasumori was skeptical. "Do you have an enemy head?" Yasumori asked. "No," said Suenaga. "Did your men die in battle?" "No." "Did you die in battle?" "No." "Then you don't get a reward." Bish. But Suenaga didn't give up. He didn't come all the way from irrelevant Japan just to get shut down in one meeting. He argued that he was wounded in battle, that he was the first from his province to charge in, and that he was shamed when his brave deeds were not reported. He also mentioned that his main concern was not the reward, of course. He had but one wish, for the shogun to know of his brave service, because it would encourage him in case there came another invasion. Persistence beats resistance. Yasumori said fine, and gave Suenaga a plot of land and also threw in a powerful horse as a bonus. Suenaga was as happy as a kid on Christmas Day who got a horse. He thought it was the greatest honor a warrior could get. Suenaga felt more loyalty to Yasumori than he did to his own clan. In his scrolls, Suenaga reminded his descendants to remember and honor Adachi Yasumori. This shifting of loyalties happened a lot in those days after the Mongol invasions. Suenaga was one of the lucky ones. The shogunate was slow in granting rewards. For the second invasion, the shogunate only started granting rewards 5 years after the invasion, and it dragged on for years. Many samurai got little tiny bite-sized pieces of land, or no land at all. When the Mongols decided to come and embarrass themselves a second time in 1281, Suenaga took a few men and again charged blindly into the battlefield like an angry lemming. Problem was, the Mongols were stuck at sea, and Suenaga didn't have a boat. He couldn't fight on a boat, he couldn't fight with a goat. You can see how haphazard the Japanese defense was at the time. So, Suenaga went boat hunting. He jumped onto another group's boat and had to jump off after they were like, "Dude, get off our boat." He found another group, and this time claimed to be a famous warrior of the shogunate. Small lies paved the way to big accomplishments. This second group agreed, but wondered why such a famous warrior didn't have a boat. They only let him on, though, not his followers. Suenaga didn't care. He left his followers behind. He was out for glory. While at sea, Suenaga realized he had forgotten his helmet. A lesser man would have demanded to have someone else's helmet, but Suenaga eats lesser men for breakfast. He found 2 shin guards lying on the boat and tied them to his head. Nothing would block his path to glory. In the battlefield, Suenaga went bananas. He spent the battle jumping onto enemy ships and slaughtering people. He would tell the enemy to surrender if they wanted to live, then kill them after they surrendered. Friends and foes alike were amazed at seeing this angry lemming jumping from boat to boat, kicking ass and not chewing bubblegum. After the battle, the commander called him the baddest man around. Suenaga did collect some heads this time, and again journeyed to Kamakura. This time, claiming a reward was a breeze. In 1293, Takezaki Suenaga commissioned an artist to create 2 scrolls of his military deeds, and historians rejoiced. Many soldiers took part in handing the Mongols their asses, but what happened to them after? A lot of them went poor. Click here to see the surprising reason why.